is Harlequin Great Dane. My wife Helen and I answered advertisements in the newspaper for puppies. And we went to look at these puppies that were advertised in the newspaper. And they were really cute puppies. They were really funny. They were white. They had big black spots. They had pink ears and pink noses. Each one of those puppies was about the size of a football and resembled a pudgy little piglet. And we played with the puppies, we got to like them better and better and better. We said, let's take one of those puppies home, we'll turn it into a pet, and we'll name our new puppy Pinkerton. Well, we brought little Pinkerton home, and Pinkerton hit our family like an artillery shell, like a bomb. Pinkerton was crazy, stubborn, perverse. Pinkerton did everything backwards. In no time flat, he became enormous. He turned our family into total chaos. In the house, into a complete mess. As his months of puppyhood dragged into years, things got worse and worse. It occurred to me more than once, this dog represented my mother's revenge. But finally enough time passed, in which we learned to adapt our lifestyles to Pinkerton's. Slowly we learned to march to the beat of Pinkerton's drum. Gradually we learned to understand Pinkerton. And then we really grew to appreciate Pinkerton. Before much time had passed, we all had to admit we had all grown to love Pinkerton. He became a very beloved, a very special member of our family. And I thought, I'd like to share Pinkerton with kids all over the country. I could put Pinkerton into a story. I could write a book about Pinkerton. And give the kids a feeling for what it was like to raise a wonderful, wacko, insane Great Dane like Pinkerton. I will call his book, Pinkerton, Behave! After Pinkerton, Behave was published, I got a great big surprise, because I had always thought that Pinkerton was a very special dog, a very unique dog. There were no dogs in the world like my crazy Pinkerton. But suddenly, I started getting lots of letters from kids and moms and dads and teachers and librarians, and they said, your Pinkerton is exactly like my Chihuahua. Or exactly like my Cocker Spaniel. Or exactly like my little mixed breed dog. Or exactly like my German Shepherd. And some people wrote letters and they said, your Pinkerton is exactly like my son. Or your Pinkerton is exactly like my husband. I was amazed to find out how many 2- and 4-legged kindred spirits of Pinkertons were bounding around. And people said, write more books about Pinkerton. So I looked around my house for another idea. I also have a wonderful old cat. A wonderful old cat who I loved very much, who could occasionally be a moody old cat. And her name was Secondhand Rose. Rose was born in the woodpile in the Catskill Mountains of New York State over 35 years ago. Some friends of ours out for a hike in the forest. It was winter, the snow was falling, and our friends were far from any farm or house or town. And suddenly, in the middle of that dark, silent winter forest, our friends heard a strange cry that seemed to be coming from inside a rotting woodpile. And they went to look at the woodpile, and they found there, to their astonishment, a tiny orange kitten, a little orange kitten, only 5 or 6 weeks old, all by itself, with no mother, no brothers and sisters, no owner, no one to take care of her. And our friends were afraid this kitten would die alone in the middle of the dark, silent winter forest. So they said, let's bring her back to our apartment and we'll turn her into a pet. But this kitten was a wild thing. She'd never been in an apartment before. She'd never seen a person before. They got her inside, she began to thaw out, and she realized where she was. She was frightened, she was scared, she was terrified, and she freaked out. And she scratched and she bit and she fought, she hissed, started tearing her apartment to pieces. Finally our friend said, there's only one family we know to deal with this wild orange kitten. That's the Kellogg's. Someone said, will you please adopt this wild orange kitten? But we agreed we would. They brought her to our house, we named her Secondhand Rose. We had Rose for 25 years. But sometimes Rose could revert to being a wild thing. She could be grouchy, she could be pushy, she could be bossy, she could be tough. Underneath all that, we quickly grew to realize that Rose had at least a small, dark heart. And if we worked very, very hard, we could find a place for ourselves in Rose's small, dark heart. And when we did, we realized that Rose was an amazing cat. Extraordinary cat. A brilliant cat. A fabulous cat. And before long, we realized we'd grown to love Rose just as much in her own way as we'd grown to love Pinkerton. But there was no room in that small, dark heart for one member of our family, and that was Pinkerton. Rose and Pinkerton had a terrible relationship, so I thought, I'll write an illustrated book about that. And I'll call that book A Rose for Pinkerton. And then I got more letters, and people said, write more books about Rose and Pinkerton together. So I did a third one called Tally-Ho Pinkerton, an adventure for Rose and Pinkerton to share. And then I thought, wouldn't it be fun to do a book about Pinkerton and dinosaurs? So I did one called Prehistoric Pinkerton, the fourth book in the Pinkerton series. And then one of my granddaughters, whose name is Amy, came into my studio one day and she said to me, Grandpa Steve, I love Pinkerton and I love penguins. I want you to write an illustrated book about Pinkerton and penguins. And I want you to dedicate that book to me. So I went to work researching penguins and thinking about penguins and Pinkerton and penguins, and I wrote about it over and over and over again. Because I never get my books just right the first time. I have to rewrite them dozens of times, sometimes hundreds of times, so I'm sure it's the very best work I can do, and I hope it's good enough to wind up on the school or library shelf for the kids to check it out, to read, to look at. And finally I came up with A Penguin Pup for Pinkerton. A Penguin Pup for Pinkerton, a story about Pinkerton and penguins, dedicated to my granddaughter Amy, the fifth book in the Pinkerton series. I love my job writing illustrated books for kids, I tell them. And I tell them I hope they have just as much fun as I do reading my books and looking at my books. Most important of all, I tell them what inspires them, write, illustrate, and share very simple stories on each and every one of them. Then I tell the kids what I would really love to do is to take them all on a field trip. I'd love to pile them into a school bus and take them off to my studio so they can see exactly where I work and how I work. And I tell them maybe we could have the fun of putting together ideas for stories we could turn into a book. But because I live way, way off in a very rural area, way up in the northeastern corner of the country, up near the Canadian border, it would take hours and hours to get there from almost anywhere. So field trips to my studio, no school would allow me to take the kids away for a day and a half or 2 days, which is what it would require. And I tell the kids I can do the next best thing. I can take advantage of something amazing that every kid has, an extraordinary imagination. And I tell them, let's go right now on an imaginary field trip. Hundreds of miles, and we'll suddenly find ourselves in front of an old yellow barn in a tangled apple orchard. Let's pull open the old doors of the barn together and step inside. And in the brown, dusky light, we don't see the horses or the cows, the bales of hay, the barrels of apples that were there for hundreds of years while it was a working farm. Alas, they're all gone now. But look, the next best thing's there. A great big drawing table with chairs for every single one of us. In front of each one of your places, there are piles of paper, there are pens and pencils and art supplies, beautiful art paper. It feels so good to touch it. And there's paints and crayons and colored inks and colored pencils. All the supplies we need to create a story. A story we could turn into a book. A book we could call The Island of the Sky. To get our story up to a very dramatic and exciting beginning, we want to start off with something that will capture the kids' attention and pull them into the story right away. So let's start off with a holiday. Let's start off with a party. Let's start off on National Rodent Day. National Rodent Day. And all the mice in the neighborhood turn out for a great big party in Jenny's clock, the old antique shop where Jenny lived. And Hannah and Wooster and Louise all came to the party, and so did Bouncer and his buddies from the bowling alley. We can always tell Hannah because she wears a great big flower hat. Hannah and Wooster and Louise all came to help Jenny celebrate National Rodent Day in the old clock in the antique shop where Jenny lived. And so did Bouncer and his buddies from the bowling alley, but they all arrived shaking after a narrow escape from the butcher's cat. old butcher's cat laid away for those mice, and he ambushed on the way to the party. He leaped out at them. They had a terrible chase up and down the streets and alleys, and those mice just barely made it to Jenny's clock in the old antique shop with their lives. Well, when Jenny saw her friends and her neighbors burst through the door of the old clock, they were shaking with fright. They were battling with the butcher's cat in the terrible chase they had had. Well, Jenny realized they were in no mood for the jolly National Rodent Day party she had planned. And Jenny knew that unless she did something drastic to cheer things up, her National Rodent Day party was going to be a terrible flop. So Jenny decided not to serve the meat and potatoes and vegetables that she cooked for the main part of the meal. Jenny decided she would cheer things up by wheeling in the dessert right away. Hot marshmallow cheesecake with raspberry fudge sauce, she announced. And through the door came Jenny wheeling this spectacular dessert. It had candles flaming, and National Rodent Day flags flying, and marshmallows and strawberries and raspberries, and hot fudge sauce dripping down the sides. When Jenny's friends and neighbors saw that beautiful cake, they forgot all about the butcher's cat and the terrible chase they'd had. They burst into great big smiles. They settled themselves around Jenny's table, and they dug into that terrific dessert. They were having a great time talking about National Rodent Day, asking for a second and third helpings of hot marshmallow cheesecake with raspberry fudge sauce. Meanwhile, the old butcher's cat had slipped in with the delivery boy. The old butcher's cat slipped into the antique shop. He heard those mice laughing and giggling and talking and asking for a second and third helpings of hot marshmallow cheesecake with raspberry fudge sauce. And the old butcher's cat took one great leap across the floor. He flattened his paws against that old clock, and he knocked Jenny's clock right off the shelf. And the front part of that clock, where you wind it, swung open, and out stumbled Hannah and Rooster and Louise. Out came poor Bouncer and his buddies from the bowling alley. Out came Jenny head over heels, and on top of Jenny came her table, and her chairs, and her china, and her silverware. And on top of everybody and everything came the hot marshmallow cheesecake with raspberry fudge sauce. And everybody and everything before Jenny's life went crashing to the floor below. Well, the old butcher's cat was trying to grab those mice, and the mice were trying to get themselves unglued from the dessert. They were racing up down the aisles of the antique shop, shrieking with fright. Well, fortunately, the delivery boy heard all the ruckus. He came running in, and he picked up the butcher's cat just as the mice barely escaped